Her breath was warm against my neck as she whispered, "We shouldn't be doing this." But her hands told a different story, sliding down my chest. The air was thick with tension, the kind that begged to be broken. I felt her fingers tighten around me, hesitation fading into something darker, something we couldn't stop. The rain tapped against the window, a soft rhythm that barely masked the storm brewing inside me. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to want this. But some things can't be undone once they start. It all began on a regular afternoon. My name is Liam. I'm 18. That day, I went over to my best friend Jake's house, like I had so many times before. But Jake wasn't home. His mother, Olivia, opened the door. And everything changed. She stood there in a tight, off-shoulder sweater, her dark hair falling in loose waves. I had seen her 100 times before, but never like this. "Jake's out," she said, leaning against the doorway. "He went to the park, but you can come in and wait." I hesitated for only a second. Then I stepped inside. The air felt different, warmer, thicker. She walked to the kitchen, her hips swaying slightly, and poured herself a glass of wine. That was the first sign. "You've grown up, Liam," she said, her voice smooth, almost teasing. "I still remember when you were just a kid running around this house." I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting. I suddenly felt hyper-aware of myself, of her eyes on me. Then she walked closer, just a little too close. Her perfume wrapped around me, intoxicating. She ran a finger along the rim of her glass, her nails painted dark red. Her lips curled into a small smile, and I knew this was dangerous. "Sit down," she said, her voice low. I sat. My heart pounded. She watched me, her gaze lingering like she was searching for something. Then she leaned forward, just enough for me to see down her sweater. That was the moment I stopped breathing. I should have stood up. I should have left. But I didn't. I couldn't. I tried to look away. I really did. But something about Olivia, about the way she held herself, the way she looked at me, made it impossible. She sipped her wine slowly, her tongue just barely flicking against the rim of the glass before she set it down. "You're quiet, Liam." Her voice was smooth, teasing. "I remember you being much more talkative when you were younger." I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. "I guess I just wasn't expecting to see you alone." She tilted her head slightly, a soft, knowing smile playing on her lips. "And is that a problem?" I shook my head too quickly. "No, not at all." She laughed, a low, throaty sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Then she leaned forward again, resting her elbows on the table, her face dangerously close to mine. "You've really grown up," she murmured. Her fingers lightly touched the back of my hand. Just for a second. But that second lasted forever. My chest tightened. My skin burned where she touched me. I should have pulled away. I didn't. Instead, I let my eyes trail over her. The curve of her lips, the way her sweater slipped slightly off her shoulder, revealing just enough skin to make my thoughts spin. Then she stood up, stretching slightly, and turned toward the kitchen counter. "You must be hungry," she said casually, as if nothing had happened. I was just about to make something. But her voice wasn't casual at all. She wanted me to follow her. And like a fool, I did. I stood up, every nerve in my body on fire. I followed her into the kitchen, where she leaned against the counter, watching me, waiting. "Come here," she whispered. I took a step closer. She didn't move away. Instead, she reached out, fingers grazing my arm, trailing down slowly. My breath hitched. My head screamed at me to stop, to turn around, to think about Jake, my best friend. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was her. And the way she looked at me, like she had already decided this was going to happen. The air between us was thick, too thick. I could hear my own breathing, could feel the heat radiating off her skin as she stepped closer. Her fingers lingered on my arm, barely touching, but the sensation burned into me like a brand. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. "You're nervous," Olivia murmured. She tilted her head, studying me with a small, amused smile. "Don't be." How could I not be? This was Jake's mother, the woman who had watched me grow up, who had cooked for us after school, who had laughed with us like she was just another friend. But she wasn't just a friend. Not anymore. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look away. Maybe I should go. She didn't move, didn't step back. Instead, she reached for the wine bottle, pouring another glass. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice soft, tempting. "You don't have to." I hesitated. And that was all she needed. She reached up, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead, her fingers trailing down my cheek. "Liam," she whispered, my name slipping off her lips like something forbidden. I looked at her then, really looked. She was so close. Her lips were parted just slightly, her breathing slow, measured. She wasn't pulling away. She was waiting. I couldn't think anymore. I couldn't breathe. And then, her lips brushed against mine. It was soft at first, just a whisper of contact. But then something inside me snapped. I grabbed her waist, pulling her against me. She let out a small gasp, her hands sliding up my chest, curling into my shirt. We shouldn't be doing this. But stopping was impossible now. She pressed against me, her warmth intoxicating. I could feel her heartbeat, the way it matched my own. Fast, desperate, hungry. And then, just as quickly, she pulled back. A flicker of something crossed her face. Guilt? Uncertainty? But it was gone in an instant. She took a deep breath, smoothing a hand down her sweater, composing herself. "Jake will be home soon," she whispered. Reality hit me like a truck. Jake. My best friend. What the hell was I doing? I stepped back, running a hand through my hair. I should really go. But Olivia only smiled. Not the warm, motherly smile I had seen growing up. This one was different. This was a promise. "You'll be back," she murmured. And she was right. I left that day. But I couldn't stay away. I didn't want to stay away. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I lasted 3 days. 3 days of trying to pretend nothing had happened. 3 days of avoiding Jake, avoiding his calls, making up excuses. 3 days of lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, remembering the way she felt pressed against me, the way she whispered my name like it meant something. And then, on the 4th night, my phone buzzed. "Olivia, come over." 2 words. That was all it took. I didn't think. Didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. By the time I arrived, it was late. Jake wasn't home. He was out with friends, just like she had planned. She opened the door before I could even knock, her eyes dark with something unreadable. No words were spoken. She pulled me inside, shutting the door behind us. And then, her lips crashed into mine. It wasn't soft this time. It wasn't hesitant. It was desperate. Fierce. Like we both knew there was no turning back. I lifted her, pressing her against the wall. She gasped against my mouth, her fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me closer. She tasted like wine and something sweeter, something that belonged to me now. That night, something shifted. It wasn't just a mistake anymore. It was an addiction. And I had no intention of stopping. Days turned into weeks. I was at Jake's house more than ever, but not for him. Every moment we could steal, every touch, every whispered secret. It became our new reality. She would brush past me in the kitchen, her fingers trailing against mine when no one was looking. She would text me in the middle of the night, knowing I would come. And I always did. But secrets don't stay secrets forever. One evening, Jake and I were playing video games in his room when his mom knocked on the door. "Liam, can you help me with something downstairs?" Jake didn't even look up. "He's in the middle of the game, Mom." But Olivia's eyes locked onto mine. "Now," she said. I swallowed hard, setting down the controller. "Be right back," I muttered. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, she grabbed my wrist, pulling me into her room. The door clicked shut. Her hands were on me before I could speak, her lips claiming mine in a kiss that sent fire straight to my veins. "We don't have much time," she whispered against my mouth. I should have been scared. Jake was right downstairs. But fear had no place in this. I wanted her too much to care. I should have known it wouldn't last. Secrets like ours always come crashing down. And when they do, they destroy everything. One night, as I lay in Olivia's bed, tangled in her sheets, the bedroom door suddenly swung open. Jake stood there. And the look in his eyes? It wasn't just betrayal. It was pure rage. The silence was deafening. Jake stood in the doorway, his fists clenched, his breath heavy. His eyes darted between me and his mother wrapped in a bedsheet, her hair tousled, her skin flushed. I felt sick. My body went cold, my mouth dry. I wanted to say something, anything. But what the hell do you say in a moment like this? "Jake," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. But he took a step forward, his jaw tightening. "What the hell is this?" His voice was shaking, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from anger. Olivia sat up slowly, gripping the sheet around her. "Jake, listen." "No. No, Mom. Don't." His voice cracked, and suddenly he turned to me. "You." His eyes were wild, filled with something I had never seen before. My best friend. Guilt crushed me. I had known this moment would come. I had imagined it 1,000 times in my head. But nothing prepared me for the way it actually felt. I opened my mouth, but before I could say a word, he lunged at me. His fist connected with my jaw, sending me stumbling back. Pain exploded through my face, but I barely felt it. Because what hurt more was the look in his eyes. Betrayal. Disgust. Hatred. I had ruined everything. "Get the hell out of my house," Jake growled. I looked at Olivia, desperate for something, some kind of explanation, some kind of way to fix this. But she just sat there, silent. She didn't beg him to stop. She didn't tell him it was all a mistake. She just watched. And in that moment I realized I was alone. Jake shoved me toward the door. "Get out," he yelled again. I stumbled down the hallway, my mind spinning. Everything was a blur. The walls, the floor, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I barely remembered getting to my car. I barely remembered driving away. But the second I pulled into my driveway, I slammed my hands against the steering wheel and screamed. Because I knew I had lost my best friend. And I didn't know if Olivia was even worth it. The next few weeks were hell. Jake blocked my number. He ignored me at school. If I even looked in his direction, he walked the other way. People started whispering. I didn't know if he had told anyone, but something was different. I wasn't Liam anymore. I was that guy. The guy who betrayed his best friend. And Olivia? She didn't text. She didn't call. She vanished. At first, I told myself it was for the best. That maybe this was how things were supposed to be. But the longer the silence stretched, the more it ate me alive. I had given up everything for her. And she was just gone. Until one night. I was lying in bed, staring at my phone, when it finally lit up. "Olivia, I need to see you." I met her at a motel on the edge of town. She was already inside when I arrived, sitting on the bed, her hands folded in her lap. She looked different. Tired. Like the weight of everything was finally crushing her. I closed the door behind me, my chest tight. "What's going on?" She didn't answer right away. Then, finally, I'm pregnant. The air left my lungs. My heart stopped. No, this wasn't happening. I stared at her, waiting for her to say something else, waiting for her to tell me it wasn't mine. But she didn't. She just looked at me, her eyes searching mine, waiting for me to understand. This was real. And suddenly everything became more complicated. I felt like I was drowning. 1 second, I was an 18-year-old kid, sneaking around with a woman I should have never touched. Now, I was going to be a father. To my best friend's mother's child. How the hell was I supposed to tell him? How the hell was I supposed to live with myself? I looked at Olivia, my mind racing. Does Jake know? She shook her head. Not yet. But I have to tell him. We have to tell him. I ran a hand through my hair, panic rising in my chest. He's going to hate me. She sighed, looking down. He already does. The words cut deeper than I expected. I sank onto the bed beside her, my hand shaking. What do we do? She turned to me, placing a hand on my knee. We figured out, she whispered. Together. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something I had lost. Hope. Maybe we could fix this. Maybe we could make it work. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. But I was wrong. This was only the beginning. 2 days later, Jake found out. And this time, he didn't just want to fight. He wanted revenge. And he knew exactly how to get it. Because Olivia, she wasn't as loyal to me as I thought. And soon, I would learn the hard way. That I wasn't the only one she had been keeping secrets from. The morning I found out, I was at work. I hadn't been expecting a call, but it came. It was Jake. I stared at my phone for a second, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't heard from him in days. Not since that night. The night everything fell apart. I answered it, my voice shaky. Jake. He didn't respond right away. The silence on the other end felt like it was swallowing me whole. Then, finally, you really think I didn't know? His voice was cold, flat. There was no trace of the best friend I once knew. What? He let out a short, bitter laugh. You think I'm an idiot? That I wouldn't find out eventually? The blood drained from my face. My throat went dry. Jake, listen, Don't, he interrupted, his voice rising now, thick with anger. Don't you dare try to explain. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to see you. My pulse was racing, my hand shaking. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. I wanted to beg him to understand. I wanted to tell him that I never meant for any of this to happen. But I couldn't get the words out. You fucked up, Liam, Jake spat. You fucked up big time. And before I could say another word, he hung up. I stood there, the phone still pressed to my ear, the weight of his words crushing me. I had never felt more alone. The next few weeks were a blur. I tried to reach out to Jake, tried to explain myself, but every attempt was met with rejection. Olivia, too, had become distant. She didn't return my calls or texts. I didn't know what to do anymore. I had destroyed everything. My friendship. My future. And Olivia? She wasn't answering my calls either. I spent night after night thinking about her. About what we had. About how good it felt when I was with her. How it made me feel alive in a way I had never experienced before. But that feeling, it came at a price. The price of losing everything. One day, I decided to go to her house. I didn't want to. I didn't know if it was even the right thing to do, but something inside me pushed me forward. I knocked on her door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I was about to turn around and leave when the door opened slightly, just enough for Olivia to peek through. Her eyes were tired, red, and full of something I couldn't read. Olivia, please, I said softly. We need to talk. She didn't say anything at first. Just stared at me, the door still half open. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. You should go, Liam. I shook my head, my chest tightening. I'm sorry, Olivia. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You have to understand, I never wanted to hurt Jake. I never. She cut me off. You've hurt him more than you'll ever know. I flinched at her words. And then, you've hurt me too. My heart sank. What do you mean? She opened the door wider, inviting me in, but I hesitated. She took a deep breath before speaking again. I should have never let it go this far, Liam. I was weak. And now we're both paying for it. I took a step inside. The house felt empty. The air was thick with tension, as if everything had changed and nothing could ever be the same. Olivia led me into the living room. She sat down, staring at the floor. I'm pregnant, Liam. Her words hit me like a brick wall. I had heard her say it before, but this time it felt different. This time it felt real. I know, I said quietly. You told me. Her eyes finally met mine, and there was something in them, something broken. I don't know what to do. I'll help you, I whispered. Whatever you need, I'll be here. She shook her head slowly, the tears welling up in her eyes. I don't think you can, Liam. This is something we've both done, and now we have to face it. Alone. I opened my mouth to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't fix what had been broken. The next few days were the hardest of my life. I went through the motions, trying to salvage whatever was left of my life. I went to work, pretending nothing had changed. But every moment was a reminder of how much I had lost. I called Jake again. This time he picked up. I can't talk to you right now, Jake said, his voice cold. I don't know if I ever will. Jake, please. You've betrayed me. You've betrayed me in ways I can't even begin to explain. There's nothing you can say to fix this, Liam. My heart shattered all over again. Please don't say that. But he had already made up his mind, and there was nothing I could do to change it. A week later, I met Olivia again. This time, it wasn't for the love we had once shared. It wasn't for the promises or the lies. It was for the truth. She sat across from me in a coffee shop, looking as tired as I felt. Her eyes were puffy, the signs of sleepless nights written all over her face. I made an appointment, she said quietly. I'm going to get rid of the baby. I froze, my heart in my throat. What? She nodded slowly. I don't think we're ready for this. I don't think you are ready for this. The words were a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to argue, to tell her that we could do it together, that we could find a way to make this work. But deep down I knew this was the end. She was right. We couldn't fix what we had broken. Not anymore. Olivia went through with the abortion. I didn't go with her. I couldn't. And though I hated myself for it, I couldn't help but feel relieved. The baby was gone. Jake was gone. And Olivia? She was gone too. I didn't hear from her again after that. And as much as I wanted to believe that we could somehow pick up the pieces, I knew the damage was done. I had lost everyone who mattered. And the worst part? I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to forgive myself. As the days turned into weeks, I tried to move on. But how could I? How could I just forget everything that happened? The secret, the betrayal, the love I felt. How do you walk away from that? From everything you ever thought was right? I couldn't just forget Olivia. I couldn't forget Jake. But life doesn't stop. It keeps pushing forward, no matter how much you try to stop it. One morning, I woke up to a message on my phone. It was from Jake. My heart pounded in my chest as I read the text. I'm sorry. 3 simple words that cut through me like nothing else. I sat there, staring at the screen, unsure if it was real. I wanted to call him. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him that he was still my best friend, no matter what had happened. But instead, I did nothing. I let the message sit there for a moment. And then, just as I was about to reply, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Jake. I miss you, man. We need to talk. It took everything in me to hold back the flood of emotions that rushed in. Jake had reached out. After everything. After how badly I'd hurt him. I grabbed my keys, my heart racing as I drove to the one place I never thought I'd go again. Jake's house. When I pulled up, I saw him standing outside. He looked different, tired, but hopeful. When our eyes met, there was this awkward silence between us, but then he smiled. Liam, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I walked up to him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we hugged. Not as friends pretending nothing had happened, but as two guys who'd been through hell and somehow found their way back to each other. Jake and I spent hours talking that day. We talked about the past. We talked about Olivia, about everything. There were tears, yes, but also laughs. There was closure, something I didn't even realize I needed. And then something incredible happened. Jake and Olivia. Well, they weren't exactly together, but they had found a way to be okay with everything. They weren't holding grudges anymore. They had both moved forward. And even though the road was messy and filled with mistakes, there was hope. Real hope. Hope that things could heal. Hope that we could all move on from the past and start fresh. I realized in that moment that life doesn't always give you perfect answers. Sometimes it's about finding peace in the middle of the chaos. As I walked away from Jake's house that day, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was forgiveness. Maybe it was just the weight of everything lifting off my shoulders. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't have Olivia in my life the way I once did, and I didn't have all the time in the world to fix everything. But what I did have was myself, and a chance to build something better from here on out. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally move forward. It wasn't easy, but it was the only choice I had. And sometimes that's enough. So, what do you think happens next? Do Jake and I finally get back to being the best friends we once were? Do Olivia and I cross paths again? Or is there something even more complicated around the corner? Don't miss the next part of the story to find out. Subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts. Let me know if you want me to continue this journey with you. The twists aren't over yet. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.